Hello, welcome back to the channel. So there has been a lot of talk lately about the bosses in the game, mainly in regards to MOC and them being kind of awful to fight, putting it lightly. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that, mainly in terms of like the boss design, especially some of the newer ones. Now before we get into it, there are like two different classifications of bosses. You know, there's the main like big bosses, you know, like Sunday, you know, the Swarm, the bosses that like mainly appear in Apocalyptic Shadow. Then you have the sort of like more normal bosses, like, you know, Kafka, Sam, that sort of thing. I think the main problem is more so with the normal bosses. The main problem being is that they are very clearly designed to be beaten with like one thing in mind. Now this isn't like necessarily a problem in of itself, because I think it's fine to have like soft counters, you know, like, oh, this thing is better against this certain boss. Like the death boss, as an example, you know, Dot is pretty much like the ideal strategy for that boss, but it's not like you aren't going to be able to beat it if you don't have Dot, you know. The problem is when it feels like if you don't have a certain thing, you just lose. Like, I think this really started with like Hule, who was very clearly designed to be beaten with follow-up. Like, yeah, you can beat him if you don't use follow-up, but the other options do feel like way worse just because of like how much he attacks, you know. And then, you know, we got Nikador, who like actually don't really mind that much. I think the main problem is just how much he attacks. And it does sometimes just feel like if you aren't using Aventurine, you just kind of die. Now we get to the latest boss, which is the Flame River, which I think I have seen like the most people complain about. The main problem with this boss is that just if you don't have AoE, you just lose. Like, you just aren't beating this boss because of the shadows. They just do so much damage that if you don't kill them, you are probably just going to die. Especially in the second phase, like, you will just get one shot if you don't kill the shadows. Which I just think is kind of awful design because, like, yeah, some things should be better against certain bosses, but it shouldn't be so mandatory that you feel like if you don't have it, you just lose. Like, this it just seems like awful design. And I don't know, I think this also kind of leads me into the other problem that I have, which is the problem of action creep. Like, bosses are just attacking way more than they used to, which is, I think, a problem for a couple of reasons. One, it makes it way harder for older characters to keep up more than they already were, because they just don't have the damage or survivability to keep up with the new bosses. Two, it makes a lot of the newer bosses feel like they just kind of have less counterplay, because it does sometimes just feel like you're just gonna take a ton of damage and there's just nothing you can do about it. Especially if you're just using like a healer or something. Sometimes you just die and there's just nothing you can do about it. Now that doesn't happen like that much, but there are like a couple of times where that feels like that's the case. It makes sense for like some bosses to like attack more, but it feels like that's just becoming like every boss, you know? I feel like that's the main problem. Like have some bosses that attack more. Just don't have it be every single one. Another thing is that it also feels like the elements of the bosses just kind of like barely matter anymore, especially with a lot more characters just being able to break regardless of element. It feels like they're being designed way more, you know, to be beaten by like one character rather than having like, you know, mechanics that you need to actually play around. And to be honest, I do think one reason for this like design change is because of the Aventurine boss, because like a lot of people did not like that boss, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people still don't like that boss. So it almost feels like they're afraid to do more unique mechanics, because the last time they tried to do it, a lot of people hated it. Now, I haven't fought Pollux yet, because I haven't finished the 3.2 story yet, so I don't know what that sort of fight is like. But as far as most of the other bosses go, it is kind of just feel like a lot of rehashing of the stuff we already seen before, just slightly different. Also, this is kind of like a bit of a tangent. Some bosses really just don't feel like bosses. Like, Cirrus is not a boss. It's just a glorified, like, pure fiction fight, like, let's be honest. Even the one with, like, all the mechs from Penacony, it doesn't really feel like a boss. It just feels like three enemies stitched together, you know? Like, same thing for, like, the troop boss from the Rappa quest. It just feels like a bunch of enemies stitched together and just call it a boss. That much of a problem with their fights, it's just that they're just kind of boring. You know, and I do think they have been doing better with this. Like, I think that the Nikador fight was cool, and also the Flame Reaver fight, even though it can be kind of annoying, it is still a cool fight. I don't know, I just hope that they don't go back to that sort of boss design, you know? I just feel like right now, bosses right now, I feel like are just mainly just about having a mechanic or character that counter them, rather than, you know, actually having an interesting mechanic that you have to play around. Like, as an example, a boss like Kafka, you know, she has her mind control thing, and you need to try to not let her get mind controlled, you know? Like, a lot of the new bosses don't really have many mechanics. Like, the Flame Reaver doesn't really have a mechanic besides just summoning ads, which you could say allows for more characters to be good against him. But really, it's like I said earlier, like you are beating the boss if you have AoE. And even some AoE characters can't keep up just because of how much he attacks. It also kind of creates a problem where bosses kind of just attack so much that sustains don't even feel that helpful because sometimes you just die anyway. So now it just kind of feels more worth it just to bring another support just to kill the boss as fast as possible, which I just think is just not good design in my opinion, because if you have to resort to that, then maybe the stats of the enemies are just getting a bit too high, you know, like, not even mentioning how obnoxious the amount of health they have now is. I've said it in like other videos, but just increasing the health does not make the fights harder. It just makes them more tedious. Like, yeah, increasing it over time does make sense as people get more builds and as we get later to the game, but the amount is way too much right now. And also, not really having any interesting mechanics on top of that just makes it feel like an artificial way to increase the difficulty and make the new characters better since they have higher multipliers. I don't know. At the end of the day, I just want bosses to feel like they have things I actually need to play around and are just like puzzles where you're just like, oh, I bring this character, I win. Because that's just really boring, you know? That's not to say there haven't been like mechanics at all. You know, like Nigador has the whole like glory and war armor thing, like a lot of the enemies in Amphorius. Even the Flame Reaver does kind of have a mechanic in the second phase where you need to kill enough of the shadows so you don't just get one shot. But, I don't know, it feels like they are getting them less, and they also just don't feel that interesting, you know? Like, it feels like a lot of time the mechanics just don't really matter that much. Well, I mean, I guess they do kind of matter, but they're just kind of boring. Like, I think that's the problem. I don't know, I do hope that we get more interesting ones in the future, because I do think a lot of the past bosses did this pretty well, so I hope that they do improve on this in the future. Now, like I said, I haven't fought Pollock, so I don't know what that's like, but I don't know, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.